Hello, debaters. By now, you've probably realized one of the few downsides of being negative in a debate round. Some affirmative plans correctly identify a problem in the status quo. If the affirmative team wants to clean up the environment, fix the economy, or address social injustices, it's pretty difficult for the negative team to claim that these things don't need fixing. So what's a team to do? Counterplans have been around for a long time, and they provide the negative team with an alternative to defending the status quo. A counterplan is an alternative to the affirmative plan, and it gives the judge a second option for solving the harms and achieving the advantages. Counterplans can also be tricky, but this video shows you how to run a counterplan when the time is right. Let's start with what a counterplan is not. A counterplan is not a second affirmative plan, so you can put away your 1AC negative teams. It's not that easy. Don't think of a counterplan as an actual plan proposed by the negative. Think of a counterplan as a hypothetical plan designed to test the affirmative plan. Here's an example of what I mean. Let's say that you tell your friend that you want the two of you to go to the same college and become doctors together. We'll call that the affirmative plan. And your friend says, okay, so let's say we do go to the same college. Could I be a lawyer and you be a doctor? Now, there are a couple of important things here. First, notice that your friend didn't agree to go to the same college. She only said, let's say we go to the same college. Then she asked a hypothetical question to test your original proposal. In other words, your friend didn't say yes, but she instead proposed a hypothetical test of your original proposal to see if your plan would work. In the very same way, the negative counterplan isn't actually a plan at all. It's a test of the affirmative plan to see if the affirmative plan is really the best way to fix the problem and achieve the advantages. One of the most popular counterplans is the state counterplan, and it's pretty easy to understand. So we'll use that as our first example. In this example, the affirmative team proposes that the federal government do something wonderful. Now, the negative team offers a counterplan that proposes that the states should do the wonderful thing instead of the federal government. And they should read some evidence to show why the states would do a better job implementing the plan. And in addition to proposing that the states do the plan, the negative team also runs a federalism disadvantage, showing all the bad things that happen when the federal government does things that states should be doing. This creates a 1-2 punch for the affirmative team. Not only has the negative team proven that the states are a better way to solve, it also proves that using the federal government links to the federalism disadvantage. Our example also demonstrates the three main ingredients for a counterplan. First, you need a counterplan text, and it needs to be written down even if it's handwritten on a piece of paper. And it can't contain the words like, the state should do the plan. It has to articulate every word of the plan itself, just like the affirmative plan text. A counterplan text, like an affirmative text, isn't something that can be changed once it's introduced into the round. Just as the affirmative team is locked into whatever plan text it reads, the negative team is also locked into whatever counterplan text it reads. And without counterplan text, there is no counterplan. The second ingredient in a counterplan is the solvency evidence, which is usually read after the counterplan text, sometimes as an observation or contention, and sometimes just under the header of solvency. The solvency evidence will always demonstrate why or how the counterplan text will solve the problem. So if the counterplan has the states do the plan, the solvency evidence should show that the states can do the plan. Without this evidence, there's nothing to support the idea that the counterplan will work or that it's better than the affirmative plan. The third ingredient in a counterplan is a net benefit. Now, a net benefit is an argument that proves that the counterplan is superior to the plan. In most debate rounds, a net benefit is simply a disadvantage run in its entirety as a completely separate argument. So even if the negative team never says the words net benefit, and even if the negative team runs the disadvantage before they run the counterplan, which they often do, the disad is understood to be the net benefit. However, it is important that the net benefit not link to the counterplan. So for example, if the counterplan has the president do the plan by executive order, and the net benefit is a disadvantage that claims the plan leads to global warming, then the disad links to both the plan and the counterplan, which is bad. Other types of net benefits could include advantages that could be gained by voting for the counterplan. This is the type of advantage counterplan. But just having these three ingredients isn't good enough. A counterplan must also face two tests of logic. Failure to meet either of these could spell disaster for your counterplan. First, counterplans must usually be untopical. I say usually because there are great arguments to support topical counterplans, but we won't get into those just yet. The reason a counterplan should be untopical is pretty simple. One team is assigned to affirm the resolution, and the other team is assigned to negate the resolution. If both teams affirm the resolution by introducing topical plans, then the judge should probably vote for the team assigned to affirm the resolution because the opposing team failed miserably to negate the resolution. And while I said that the negative team can run topical counterplans, you'll really need to explore the theory in doing so before running a topical counterplan. The second logical test is that the counterplan must be competitive. The competitiveness of a counterplan is demonstrated in one of two primary ways: mutual exclusivity or net benefit. Mutual exclusivity simply means that a policymaker couldn't adopt the affirmative plan and the negative counterplan together. If the plan doesn't force the judge to choose one or the other, then the affirmative plan still stands in the round. Here's an example. If one friend is trying to convince you to go to dinner and another friend is trying to convince you to go see a movie instead, those two options aren't mutually exclusive because it's possible to do both. In this example, the suggestion to go to dinner still stands as a viable option. Let's use our state's counterplan example. In this example, the affirmative team wants the federal government to do the plan, and the negative team wants the states to do the plan. A reasonable policymaker would never choose to do both the counterplan and the plan, so it's truly a competitive option. A second way to demonstrate a counterplan's competitiveness is through the net benefit. If the negative team can successfully show that voting for a counterplan would be significantly more advantageous than either voting for the affirmative plan or voting for both the plan and the counterplan, then the counterplan would be competitive. Here's an example. The affirmative plan proposes to use the federal government to invest in Latin American trade. The counterplan proposes to encourage China to invest in Latin American trade. And their solvency evidence claims that China wants to make this investment and that it would work. While it's possible for both countries to invest in trade, the advantages of asking China to make the investment are clearly superior, and thus the counterplan is considered a competitive option that successfully challenges or tests the merits of the affirmative plan. Okay, so now you know all the parts to a counterplan, and you know all the logical tests of your counterplan. There's one more thing we need to discuss, and that's the status of your counterplan. As you know, the affirmative team is locked into the affirmative plan. If things aren't going well, the affirmative team does not have the option to kick, drop, punt, or otherwise revise the plan proposed in the 1AC. Since that's true, it could also be true that the negative team should be forced to defend its counterplan for the same reasons as the affirmative team is forced to defend the affirmative plan. The answer to that question will determine the status of your counterplan. And you can bet that a good affirmative team will begin every cross-examination by asking for the status of your counterplan, so be ready with your answer. Now, there are three types of counterplan statuses: unconditional, conditional, and dispositional. You can think of these three the same way you think of Facebook relationship statuses: in a relationship, single, or it's complicated. If a negative team says that the status of their counterplan is unconditional, they mean that they are married to the text of the counterplan exactly as the affirmative team is married to the text of their plan. The negative team will defend their counterplan all the way through rebuttals and can't change, drop, or kick the counterplan. Affirmative teams want counterplans to be unconditional. So if a negative team ever says that their counterplan is unconditional, affirmative teams are usually satisfied with that answer. If the negative team says that the status of the counterplan is conditional, which 99% of teams do, they mean that they are running their counterplan as one of many negative arguments, and just as they can kick out of disaz or topicality, they reserve the right to kick out of their counterplan. Affirmative teams don't really want a debate round in which they are bound to their plan text, but the negative is not bound to their counterplan text. So negative teams with conditional counterplans can usually expect the affirmative team to run condo bad theory, which is another way of saying that the affirmative team will argue that conditional counterplans are bad, and they will usually read debate theory evidence or arguments to support that claim. Negative teams will want to be prepared with condo good theory arguments to support the claim that conditional counterplans are good for negative teams. Finally, we get to dispositional counterplans. To be honest, unconditional counterplans are very rare, and dispositional counterplans are even rarer. A dispositional counterplan status means that the negative team is willing to be bound by their plan text unless the affirmative team manages to straight turn the counterplan, which is sort of like a prenuptial agreement in which two parties agree to get married, but if things don't work out, there are specific arrangements for dissolving the marriage. Now, because dispositional counterplans are extremely rare, the chances that you will hit one are minimal. But if you do, make sure you understand exactly what circumstances will and will not allow the negative team to kick their counterplan. And if you don't like those circumstances, be prepared to argue that that is unfair. Okay, so now we've explored the ingredients for a counterplan and the statuses of the counterplan. Let's take a look at the different types of counterplans. The first type of counterplan is the agent counterplan. This type of counterplan replaces the agent of action used in the affirmative plan. Most affirmatives simply use the words federal government to carry out their plan. And that gives them great flexibility to clarify in cross-examination whether that means the legislative, executive, or judicial branches of the federal government. An agent counterplan bypasses one or more branches of the federal government and uses all or some of the states, a foreign country, private industry, or non-governmental organization such as the Red Cross or the United Nations. By changing the agent of action to something other than the federal government, negative teams can run net benefit disads that link the affirmative plan to any of the supposed evils that come from using the federal government to enact the plan. A subset of the agent counterplan is the EXO or executive order counterplan. This counterplan passes the plan solely through the executive branch, which allows the negative counterplan to avoid the politics disadvantage that the affirmative plan links to because it uses Congress. The second type of counterplan is the PIC or plan-inclusive counterplans, and that's actually most counterplans. PICs usually do most of the affirmative plan, but some small change is made to exclude or include some detail that isn't true for the affirmative plan. For example, the negative might propose to do the plan in all 50 states except Florida. Such a counterplan would be accompanied by a disadvantage that claims, for example, that Florida would be very upset with the plan. The third type of counterplan is the delay counterplan, pretty rare. The delay counterplan postpones the passage of the affirmative plan, usually after some important piece of legislation is passed. Paired with the politics disadvantage, the counterplan avoids the disad because it uses political capital after the important legislation identified in the disad has already passed Congress. The fourth and final type of counterplan is the conditions counterplan. Now, this counterplan makes passage of the counterplan contingent upon certain conditions being met. For example, the negative team might run a disadvantage claiming that the affirmative plan would be perceived as a hostile threat to China, then run a counterplan that consults with China before implementing the plan, thus ensuring that China doesn't feel threatened. Counterplans are highly effective tools used by negative teams to sidestep the status quo and offer hypothetical tests of the affirmative plan. Because they are hypothetical tests, they aren't really plans at all. Instead, they are a way of testing whether the affirmative team has offered the best possible manner of implementing the plan. Now that's it for counterplans. Let's take a moment to review our major terms. Counterplan text, solvency contention, net benefit, untopical counterplans, mutual exclusivity, competitiveness, counterplan status, unconditional conditional dispositional arguments, agent counterplan, plan-inclusive counterplan or PIC, delay counterplan, conditions counterplan. That's all for now. Good luck, debaters.